The mirror changed overnight. I swear that yesterday, my reflection didn't blink 3 seconds after I did. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. The Harbrook estate loomed against the October sky, its Victorian spires piercing through the morning fog like accusatory fingers. I'd seen plenty of grand houses in my career as a historical researcher and genealogist, but something about this one made me pause before exiting my car. Perhaps it was the way the windows seemed to watch me, dark and expectant, like eyes that had seen too much. Ms. Wilson, Rebecca Wilson, a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached, hand extended. "I'm James Montgomery, Mr. Harbrook's estate manager. Thank you for coming on such short notice." I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip. Was the opportunity to research a property with such history isn't something I could pass up? Indeed, he gestured toward the house. Mr. Harbrook is particularly interested in uncovering the history of the previous owners, the Lambert family specifically. The grand foyer of the estate was exactly what you'd expect from a late Victorian mansion. Ornate woodwork, a sweeping staircase, and an abundance of mirrors. I noticed them immediately, gilt-framed looking glasses of various sizes adorning almost every wall, reflecting the room in endless iterations. "Mr. Harbrook collects antique mirrors," James explained, noticing my gaze. Most of these came with the house, though the Lamberts apparently shared his passion. He led me to a study on the first floor, where a portly man with a meticulously trimmed beard rose from behind a massive desk. "Ms. Wilson, welcome." Harbrook's voice was surprisingly soft for his imposing frame. "I hope James has explained the basics of what I'm looking for." A comprehensive history of the Lambert family, who owned this estate from its construction in 1882 until... I trailed off, realizing I didn't know when the Lamberts had left. "Until 1953, Harbrook supplied. When the last Lambert died without heirs, the property changed hands several times after that, falling into disrepair until I purchased it last year." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." I settled into a leather armchair as Harbrook returned to his seat behind the desk. "What specifically interests you about the Lamberts?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. Harbrook exchanged a glance with James before answering. "The family had peculiarities, eccentricities that sparked local legends. I've heard whispers since purchasing the property, but nothing concrete. I want facts, Miss Wilson. Historical documentation." "I understand. Do you have any family records to start with? Photographs, journals, letters?" James stepped forward, placing an ornate wooden box on the desk. "These are the only Lambert documents we've found in the house so far. Most rooms still haven't been properly examined since the renovation began." The box contained a small collection of photographs, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be partial journal entries. I carefully spread them on the desk, examining each item. One photograph immediately caught my attention. Two young boys in formal attire, perhaps 10 and 13 years old, standing stiffly before what appeared to be a large mirror. The boys' faces were solemn, their eyes holding that distant look common in Victorian photography when subjects had to remain still for extended periods. But it was the mirror that made my breath catch. It showed the room behind the photographer clearly, the patterned wallpaper, a chair, the edge of a doorway. But where the boys' reflections should have been, there was nothing, just the empty room. "This must be a double exposure or some sort of photographic trick," I said, turning the photograph over. On the back, in faded brown ink, someone had written Thomas and Edward Lambert, 1897. Harbrook leaned forward, eyes gleaming with interest. "That's precisely the sort of thing I'm curious about. The local legend says the Lambert men were born without reflections." I raised an eyebrow. "Be like vampires." "Nothing so melodramatic," James interjected. The stories say it was a family curse, supposedly dating back to the 1600s. Interesting. I examined the photograph more closely, looking for signs of manipulation. This would be quite the elaborate hoax for 1897. Is it possible? Harbrook asked. Double exposure photography existed then, certainly, but this is remarkably well done if it's a trick. I set the photograph aside. I'll need to do proper research, of course. Family records, local history, that sort of thing. Whatever you need, Harbrook said. The local library has archives of the town newspaper dating back to the 1880s, and I understand the county records office might have Lambert family documents. I'll start there. I carefully returned the items to the box, but Harbrook raised a hand. Keep them for now. They might help with your research. As James showed me out, I couldn't help but notice the mirrors again. Something about them felt off, though I couldn't quite place what. It was only when I passed a particularly large one in the hallway that I realized the reflections seemed to lag just a fraction of a second behind my movements. I paused, watching my reflection. It stopped when I did, its eyes meeting mine with perfect synchronicity. I must have imagined it. "Is everything all right, Ms. Wilson?" James asked from the doorway. "Yes, fine." I hurried to join him. "Just admiring the craftsmanship of these mirrors. They're quite special," he agreed. Handmade by Flemish artisans, according to the records. The Lamberts imported them specifically for this house. Outside, the fog had lifted, but the sky remained overcast, casting the estate in a flat, grayish light that somehow made it look even more imposing. "I'll be in touch once I have some initial findings," I told James. "And probably by the end of the week." He nodded. "Mr. Harbrook is eager for results, but he understands that proper historical research takes time." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the house receding behind me. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw two small figures standing in one of the upper windows, watching me leave. But when I looked again, the window was empty. The town library was housed in a charming brick building from the 1930s. The archivist, a woman in her 60s named Margaret, perked up when I mentioned the Lambert family. "Oh, the Lamberts. We don't get many people researching them these days." She led me to a back room filled with microfilm readers and acid-free storage boxes. They were quite prominent in the area for decades. Philanthropists, actually. Built the original hospital and funded the first public school. "What happened to them?" I asked as she pulled several boxes from the shelves. "Died out, eventually. The last one was, let me think, Frederick Lambert. Died in the early 50s, I believe. No children." She set the boxes on a reading table. "These contain all our clippings related to the family, plus some donated materials, birth and death records, business dealings, social events, that sort of thing." I spent the rest of the day poring over the materials. The Lamberts had indeed been a wealthy, respected family. They'd made their fortune initially in textiles, then diversified into banking and real estate. Charles Lambert, who built the estate in 1882, had been a particular force in the community, establishing various charitable foundations and serving 2 terms as mayor. But there were odd gaps in the record. Few photographs existed of the Lambert men, and those that did were either group shots where they were partially obscured, or formal portraits taken at curious angles. Women and girls in the family appeared in photographs normally. By late afternoon, I'd found several references to what the locals had apparently called the Lambert peculiarity. A society column from 1899 mentioned that young Edward Lambert continues the family tradition of avoiding reflective surfaces at social gatherings, much to the amusement of his peers. Another article from 1912 noted that Thomas Lambert had donated generously to the new town hall on the condition that the mirrors in the ballroom be temporarily removed for the inaugural gala. The most explicit reference came in an interview with an elderly maid who had worked at the Lambert estate. Published in 1947 in a series called Memories of Old Blackfield, she recalled, "The Lambert gentlemen never had mirrors in their personal chambers. Mrs. Lambert told me once it was a family affliction, something about their eyes not processing reflections properly, but the staff whispered it was something else entirely. A curse, they said, though none dared speak of it openly." And you, have you ever experienced anything strange with mirrors? Let us know in the comments. As the library was closing, Margaret approached my table. "Finding what you need?" "Yes, though there are still some mysteries." I showed her the photograph of the boys without reflections. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" She adjusted her glasses, studying the image. "Ah, the Lambert boys. Yes, we have a copy of this in our collection. Fascinating, isn't it? Some say it was a clever photographic trick, but I prompted when she trailed off. Margaret lowered her voice. "My grandmother worked as a cook for the Lamberts in the 1930s. She said it was absolutely true. The Lambert men cast no reflections. She'd seen it herself countless times." She straightened up, looking slightly embarrassed. "Family legends, you know. Every old house has them." "Did she ever say why? What caused this peculiarity?" "Only that it dated back to their ancestor, Willem Lambert, a Flemish mirror maker who came to England in the 1660s. Supposedly he discovered or created something he shouldn't have." She glanced at the clock. "I'm sorry, but we're closing. You're welcome to come back tomorrow." I gathered my notes and the box Harbrook had lent me. "I'll definitely return. Thank you for your help." That evening, in my small rented room at the local inn, I spread my findings across the bed. The Lambert story was proving more intriguing than I'd anticipated. A family curse involving mirrors and missing reflections sounded like something from a Gothic novel, yet there seemed to be consistent references to it across decades of records. I picked up the photograph of Thomas and Edward again. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, their expressions seemed even more haunting, solemn beyond their years, with a wariness in their eyes that spoke of children who had already learned life's harder lessons. Before turning in, I went to the bathroom to wash my face. As I reached for the towel, I caught a glimpse of something strange in the mirror above the sink. For just a moment, so brief I might have imagined it, my reflection seemed to move independently, its hand reaching for the towel a fraction of a second before mine did. I froze, staring at my reflection. It stared back, perfectly mimicking my startled expression. "Just tired," I told myself. "Too many hours squinting at microfilm." But as I turned off the light and closed the bathroom door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. As if by looking too deeply into the Lambert mystery, I had somehow drawn its attention to me. I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with ornate mirrors and solemn-faced children who stood motionless, watching me with knowing eyes. I woke several times, certain I'd heard whispers coming from the bathroom, soft, indistinct murmurings in what sounded like an unfamiliar language. Each time I turned on the light and checked, finding nothing but the ordinary silence of a country inn after midnight. At 3:17 a.m., I woke with a start. The room was pitch black, but I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, knocking over my glass of water in the process. When the light finally came on, I was alone. Water dripped from the nightstand onto the worn carpet. I got up to get a towel from the bathroom, but paused at the door. Something kept me from wanting to face the mirror again in the middle of the night. Instead, I used a t-shirt from my suitcase to mop up the spill, then sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly wide awake. I pulled out my laptop and began organizing my notes on the Lambert family. If I couldn't sleep, I might as well work. By morning, I had constructed a partial family tree going back to Willem Lambert, the Flemish mirror maker who had immigrated to England in the 1660s. According to the fragments I'd pieced together, Willem had established a successful business creating mirrors for wealthy clients, developing a reputation for craftsmanship that was almost supernatural in quality. His son, Gerard, had continued the trade before moving the family business into textiles during the early Industrial Revolution. The mirror making seemed to have stopped with him, though the family had continued collecting mirrors throughout subsequent generations. What was missing from the records was any explicit mention of the curse, or when it had begun. The earliest reference I'd found to the reflection phenomenon was from 1843, in a personal letter where a local doctor mentioned that young Henry Lambert suffered from the family affliction regarding reflective surfaces. After a quick breakfast, I returned to the library where Margaret had more materials waiting for me. "I called a friend at the county records office," she said, setting down a fresh box. "They found some Lambert family papers that had never been properly catalogued, birth certificates, property deeds, and," she paused dramatically, "a partial journal belonging to Eliza Lambert from the 1880s. Eliza Lambert? That would be Charles's wife?" I asked, recalling the family tree I'd constructed. Margaret nodded. "Mother to Thomas and Edward, the boys in your photograph." The journal was fragile, its leather binding cracked with age, but most of the pages were intact. Eliza's handwriting was neat and precise, detailing the social engagements, household management, and occasional personal reflections of a Victorian lady of standing. It wasn't until the entry dated September 3rd, 1887, that I found what I was looking for. Thomas displayed the first signs of the Lambert affliction today. He came to me in tears, saying he could not find himself in the nursery mirror. I had hoped, with all my heart, that at least one of my sons might be spared, but it seems the curse continues unbroken. Charles says I must not use that word. Curse. But what else can one call it? 5 generations of Lambert men, born without reflections, as if some part of their very souls is missing. I asked Charles again about the origin, but he remains reticent as always. All he will say is that it began with Willem, who sought to create mirrors of unnatural perfection and succeeded too well. Some things are not meant to be captured in glass and silver, Charles told me, and when one tries, there is always a price. My heart raced as I read these words. Here, finally, was confirmation, not just of the phenomenon itself, but that the family viewed it as a curse with a specific origin. The reference to glass and silver clearly pointed to the silvering process used in mirror making, suggesting Willem had somehow altered the traditional techniques. I continued reading, finding scattered references throughout the journal. Eliza wrote of Thomas and Edward learning to navigate a world full of reflective surfaces, of teaching them to comb their hair by touch and straighten their ties without visual confirmation. She mentioned the family's collection of mirrors, which Charles maintained despite his condition, and their careful positioning throughout the house, so that the afflicted gentleman may move about without accidentally encountering their absence. The most disturbing entry came near the end of the journal, dated May 15, 1891. Edward was inconsolable today. He claims he saw something in his place in the drawing room mirror, not his own reflection, which has never appeared, but something else. A shadow with eyes, he called it. Charles dismissed it as childish imagination, but I saw the fear in his face. He knows more than he tells me. Later, I overheard him in his study, speaking sternly to Edward. "You must never look for too long, never search for what isn't there. The mirrors remember, Edward, they always remember." The journal ended shortly after, with no further explanation of what Charles had meant by those cryptic warnings. I sat back, my mind racing with questions. What exactly had Willem Lambert done to create this curse? What did the mirrors remember, and why was it dangerous to look for too long? My contemplation was interrupted by the library door opening. James Montgomery, Harbrook's estate manager, strode in with purpose. "Ms. Wilson," he said, approaching my table. "Mr. Harbrook sent me to check on your progress. He's quite eager for an update." "I found some fascinating information," I replied, gesturing to the materials spread before me, including confirmation that the Lambert men indeed lacked reflections. "It seems to have been a family trait dating back generations." James's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Harbrook will be pleased. He's particularly interested in anything related to Willem Lambert and his mirror-making techniques." "I haven't found much detail on that yet," I admitted. "Not just references to him creating mirrors of unnatural perfection that somehow triggered the family curse." James nodded a bit too quickly. "Perhaps the county records might have more, or," he hesitated, "the Lambert Mausoleum." "Mausoleum?" "Yes, in the old churchyard at St. Bartholomew's. All the Lamberts are interred there, including Willem. Local legend says he was buried with his notes and tools. Superstitious nonsense, of course, but there might be inscriptions or family crests that could provide clues." I made a note to visit the churchyard. "Thank you for the suggestion." "Mr. Harbrook also wanted me to invite you to dinner at the estate tonight," James continued. "He's eager to hear about your findings in person." I hesitated, remembering the uneasy feeling I'd had in that house full of mirrors. But professional curiosity won out, and I'd be delighted. After James left, I continued through the records, finding scattered references to the Lambert affliction, but nothing substantive about its origin. By mid-afternoon, I decided to visit St. Bartholomew's before heading to my dinner engagement. The old churchyard was exactly what you'd expect in a small English town: weathered gravestones, tilting at odd angles, ancient yew trees casting long shadows across the grass. The Lambert Mausoleum stood apart, a neo-Gothic structure of imposing granite with a wrought iron gate guarding its entrance. The gate was unlocked, which surprised me. Inside, stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each bearing the Lambert name and dates. Willem's was at the far end, distinguished by elaborate carvings of intertwined vines and what appeared to be mirror frames. The inscription read, "Willem Lambert, 1632–1701. Qui in speculum videre possunt videre veritatem." My Latin was rusty, but I recognized it as something like, "Those who can see into the mirror can see the truth." Below this was a smaller inscription, partially worn away by time. "He who seeks to capture more than reflection risks losing his own." I took photographs of the inscriptions and examined the carvings more closely. Round the edge of Willem's sarcophagus ran a series of symbols I didn't recognize. Not quite alchemical, not quite astrological, but reminiscent of both. I photographed these as well. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye. A small reflective panel had been inset into the stone wall beside Willem's sarcophagus. It wasn't immediately recognizable as a mirror. The surface was tarnished and darkened with age, but when I moved closer, I could see it was indeed a reflective surface, approximately the size of a small book. I leaned in, trying to make out my reflection in the clouded surface. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then slowly, a face emerged, but not mine. It was the face of a man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with an expression of profound sorrow. His lips moved as if speaking, though I heard nothing. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. The face vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the tarnished surface. Had I imagined it? A trick of the light, perhaps? Or my mind imposing patterns on the clouded mirror? I hurried out of the mausoleum, shaken by what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. The late afternoon sun was sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the churchyard. I checked my watch, realizing I had barely enough time to return to the inn, change, and make it to the Harbrook estate for dinner. As I drove back, I couldn't shake the image of that sorrowful face in the ancient mirror. Had it been Willem Lambert himself, or one of his descendants, somehow trapped in the reflective surface? The thought was absurd, of course. The rational part of my mind knew that, yet after everything I'd learned about the Lambert curse, I couldn't entirely dismiss it either. Back at the inn, I changed quickly into the one semi-formal outfit I'd packed, a simple black dress and cardigan. As I applied a touch of lipstick in the bathroom mirror, I found myself studying my reflection intently. It mimicked my movements perfectly, exactly as a reflection should. And yet, there was something in the eyes, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before, a depth that seemed to extend beyond the surface of the glass. I blinked, and my reflection blinked, precisely when it should have. I was being ridiculous, letting the Lambert stories get to me. The Harbrook estate was dramatically lit against the evening sky when I arrived, lights blazing from every window. James met me at the door, escorting me to a formal dining room where Harbrook waited at the head of a table set for 3. "Ms. Wilson," he said, rising to greet me. "I'm eager to hear what you've discovered." Over an elaborate dinner served by silent staff, I shared my findings, the journal entries confirming the reflection phenomenon, the warnings about looking too long into mirrors, the cryptic inscriptions in the mausoleum. I deliberately omitted mentioning the face I thought I'd seen in the ancient mirror, unwilling to sound like I'd succumbed to superstition. Harbrook listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing me to speak uninterrupted. It was only when I mentioned Willem's mirror-making techniques that he showed particular animation. "Do you think his methods could be recreated?" he asked, leaning forward. "The process that created these special mirrors?" The question struck me as odd. "I haven't found any technical details," I replied carefully. "Not only vague references to creating mirrors of unnatural perfection, but with more research, perhaps," Harbrook pressed. "Old formulae, workshop notes, that sort of thing." I glanced at James, who was watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I suppose it's possible," I said slowly. Though if the family considered it a curse, I'm not sure why anyone would want to recreate it." Harbrook sat back, his expression smoothing into a pleasant smile. "Purely academic interest, I assure you. The history of craftsmanship is a passion of mine." After dinner, Harbrook insisted on giving me a tour of the house, focusing particularly on the extensive collection of mirrors. Each had a history, he explained. This one from 17th century Venice, that one from the court of Louis XIV, another from the Ottoman Empire. "And these," he said, stopping before a set of 3 identical mirrors in gilt frames, "are original Lambert creations. Willem's work, authenticated by experts." I studied the mirrors with newfound interest. They appeared ordinary enough, perhaps unusually clear for their age, but otherwise unremarkable. "They don't seem speciality," I said cautiously. "Don't they?" Harbrook replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Look closer, Ms. Wilson, look deeper." I hesitated, remembering Eliza Lambert's journal entry. "You must never look for too long, never search for what isn't there." But curiosity overcame caution. I stepped closer to the central mirror, examining my reflection. For several seconds, nothing seemed unusual. Then, gradually, I noticed something strange. The room reflected behind me was not quite the same as the actual room. The differences were subtle, the pattern of the wallpaper slightly altered, the furniture arranged differently, the doorway positioned a few feet to the left of where it actually stood, and there was something else. In the reflection, a shadow moved in the doorway, a figure watching me that wasn't present in the real room. I spun around, but the actual doorway was empty. "Fascinating, aren't they?" Harbrook said, his voice uncomfortably close to my ear. They show more than mere reflections. They show possibilities. I stepped back from the mirror, my heart racing. It's getting late. I should be going. Harbrook's smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, of course. James will see you out. As James walked me to the door, I couldn't resist asking, "How long have you worked for Mr. Harbrook?" "Many years," he replied vaguely. "He has a particular interest in rare artifacts with unusual properties, like mirrors that show things that aren't there." James gave me a sharp look. Be careful, Miss Wilson. Some knowledge isn't meant for casual research. The Lamberts understood that eventually." The warning stayed with me as I drove back to the inn. What exactly was Harbrook's interest in the Lambert mirrors? And why did I feel increasingly uneasy about this assignment? Back in my room, I avoided looking at the bathroom mirror as I prepared for bed, but as I was about to turn off the light, I noticed something on the bedside table that sent a chill down my spine. My notebook lay open to a page I didn't remember writing on. In handwriting that resembled mine but wasn't quite right, the loops too elaborate, the slant too severe, were the words, "The mirrors remember, and now they remember you." I stared at the words in my notebook, my pulse racing. The handwriting bore a superficial resemblance to mine, but the differences were unmistakable. More flourishes, sharper angles, a heaviness to the strokes I never used. Someone had written in my notebook while I was out. But how? The door had been locked, the window secured. With trembling hands, I called the front desk. No one had entered my room, the night manager assured me. No housekeeping, no maintenance, no other guests mistakenly given the wrong key. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in the armchair by the window, laptop open, researching mirror folklore and the history of Flemish mirror making into the early hours. What I found only deepened the mystery. In the 17th century, when Willem Lambert was working, mirrors were objects of fascination and superstition. The process of creating them, applying a mixture of tin, mercury, and other metals to glass, was shrouded in secrecy and often associated with alchemy. Some believed mirrors could capture more than mere reflections. They could trap fragments of the soul. There were scattered references to mirror makers experimenting with forbidden methods during this period, adding unusual elements to the silvering mixture, incorporating occult symbols into the frames, or conducting rituals during the creation process. Most of these accounts were dismissed as superstition or competitors attempting to discredit rivals. But what if Willem Lambert had actually discovered something? What if he had created mirrors that truly captured something more than reflection? By dawn, my eyes were burning from exhaustion, but my mind was too wired to rest. I decided to visit the county records office when it opened, hoping to find more concrete information about Willem and his techniques. The county archivist, a thin man named Dr. Phelps, was initially reluctant to allow me access to the oldest records. "These documents are extremely fragile," he explained, eyeing me dubiously. They rarely leave our secure storage." I explained my research for Mr. Harbrook, mentioning his prominent position in the community. The name had the desired effect. "Well, I suppose we could make an exception," Dr. Phelps conceded. "But you'll need to wear gloves and I'll have to supervise." He led me to a small room with a single table and disappeared into the secure storage area. When he returned, he carried a leather-bound ledger and several loose documents in acid-free folders. "These are guild records from the mid-1600s, he explained. "They include some materials related to Willem Lambert's mirror-making business. There's also a partial inventory of his workshop after his death, though it's in rather poor condition." The guild records confirmed what I already knew. Willem Lambert had been a respected craftsman, known for mirrors of exceptional clarity and durability. There were references to his proprietary methods and unique approach to silvering, but no specific details about his techniques. The inventory was more interesting. It listed conventional materials like glass sheets, silvering solution, and framing tools, but also included items that seemed out of place in a mirror maker's workshop. 1 brass astrolabe, 7 carved stone symbols of unknown origin, 12 vials of substances labeled in cipher, and most intriguingly, 1 leather-bound volume titled Speculorum Animarum, removed by family. Speculorum Animarum, I murmured. The Mirror of Souls. Dr. Phelps glanced up from his desk across the room. Pardon. Nothing, I said quickly, just translating a title. I continued through the documents, finding one final item of interest, a letter dated 1698, 3 years before Willem's death, written to his son Gerard. Most of it concerned business matters, but the final paragraph caught my attention. As to your inquiry regarding my methods, I must again refuse to divulge the complete process. What I have discovered comes at too great a cost. The mirrors function as intended. They show perfect reflections, unmarred by the flaws that plague lesser works. But they capture more than they should, and what they take cannot be restored. I fear the consequence has already manifested in you, my son, and may continue through our line unless the process is reversed. I am working to this end, though success eludes me. Until then, guard yourself when gazing upon reflective surfaces, for they remember what they have taken and seek always to claim more. A chill ran down my spine. This confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that Willem had inadvertently created the family curse through his mirror-making process, and that it had first affected his son, Gerard. But what exactly did the mirrors take? Reflections, obviously, but the letter suggested something deeper, something essential that cannot be restored. And what did he mean by the mirrors seeking to claim more? I photographed the documents with my phone and thanked Dr. Phelps for his assistance. As I was leaving, he called after me, "Ms. Wilson, you might be interested to know that we have one other item related to Willem Lambert, though it's not a document." "Oh," I turned back, curious. "Follow me." He led me to a small exhibit room where various historical artifacts were displayed in glass cases. In the corner was a simple wooden display stand holding what appeared to be a hand mirror, its silver tarnished almost black with age. This was donated to the County Museum in 1954 after the last Lambert died, Dr. Phelps explained. It's believed to be one of Willem Lambert's earliest works, made before he perfected his special technique. I examined the mirror through the glass case. Its frame was ornately carved with the same symbols I'd seen on Willem's sarcophagus. The reflective surface was so darkened by tarnish that it barely functioned as a mirror anymore, showing only the vaguest outline of my face when I leaned close. "Has anyone tried to restore it?" I asked. Dr. Phelps shook his head. The conservator who examined it recommended against restoration. Something about the silvering technique being unique and potentially degraded by modern cleaning methods. He paused, though between us, I think he was just spooked by it. Spooked? Why? He looked uncomfortable. He claimed he saw, well, things that weren't there when he looked at it under his examination lights. Faces that weren't his own. Probably just tricks of the light on the tarnished surface. "May I?" I gestured to the case. Dr. Phelps hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, "Please don't touch the reflective surface. The silvering is quite fragile." He unlocked the case and carefully handed me the mirror. It was heavier than it looked, the wooden frame solid and dense in my hands. I angled it toward the overhead lights, trying to see past the tarnish. At first, I saw nothing but a dim, distorted reflection of my own face, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something strange. The reflection wasn't moving quite in sync with me. When I tilted my head, my reflection followed a fraction of a second later. When I blinked, my reflected eyes remained open for just a moment too long. And then, as I watched, my reflection's expression changed. While I maintained a neutral look of concentration, my reflected face slowly smiled. A cold, knowing smile I had never made. I nearly dropped the mirror, fumbling to hand it back to Dr. Phelps. "Interesting piece, isn't it?" he said, apparently not noticing my distress as he carefully returned it to the case. "Very," I managed to reply. "Thank you for showing me." I left the records office with my mind reeling. What I'd just experienced couldn't be explained away as tired eyes or an overactive imagination. The reflection had moved independently of me. It had smiled when I hadn't. The implications were staggering. If Willem Lambert had somehow created mirrors that could capture or manipulate reflections, what else might they be capable of? And what did it mean that I was now experiencing these phenomena myself? I needed to speak with someone who might understand the history better than I did. Margaret at the library had mentioned her grandmother working for the Lamberts. Perhaps there were other locals with family connections to the estate. The local historical society seemed the best place to start. Housed in a converted Victorian townhouse, it was staffed by volunteers, mostly retirees with deep roots in the community. I introduced myself to the elderly gentleman at the reception desk, explaining my research on the Lambert family. "The Lamberts?" His bushy eyebrows rose. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in some time. You'll want to speak with Eleanor Blackwood. Her mother was a Lambert cousin, if I recall correctly." Eleanor turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. When I mentioned my research, she invited me to join her for tea in the society's small kitchen. "So you're investigating the Lambert curse," she said without preamble as she poured the tea. I wondered when someone would take an interest again. "You know about the curse?" I asked, surprised by her directness. "My mother was Catherine Lambert before she married, a distant cousin of the main line, but Lambert enough to know the family secrets." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. Though the women were never affected themselves, only the men were born without reflections. "So it's true then. It wasn't just a family legend or a photographic trick." Eleanor's eyes met mine sharply. "Oh, it was quite real. My mother took me to visit Harbrook House, Lambert House, as it was then, when I was a girl. I remember watching cousin Frederick walk through the grand hall, passing mirror after mirror without casting any reflection at all." She sipped her tea. "It was unsettling, to say the least. Do you know how it began? The records suggest Willem Lambert's mirror-making techniques were somehow responsible." She nodded. The story passed down in the family was that Willem discovered a method of creating perfect mirrors, ones that showed reflections with absolute fidelity, capturing every detail exactly as it was, not reversed as normal mirrors do. "Is that even possible?" I asked, skeptical despite everything I'd seen. Conventional science would say no. But Willem wasn't just a craftsman. He was an alchemist of sorts, obsessed with the philosophical properties of reflection. He believed mirrors weren't simply tools for vanity, but windows into the true nature of the soul. She leaned forward. "Well, the family story says he discovered, or perhaps summoned, something that helped him create these perfect mirrors, but there was a price. The reflections of the Lambert men." "Yes. Though it wasn't just their reflections that were taken, it was something deeper, a piece of their essence, I suppose you might call it." Eleanor's voice dropped lower. "My mother said the Lambert men always seemed somewhat diminished, brilliant and accomplished, but lacking something fundamental, as if they were never quite fully present in the world." A memory flashed in my mind, the face I'd seen in the tarnished mirror at the mausoleum, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with an expression of profound sorrow. "And you think these pieces of them were somehow trapped in the mirrors?" I asked. "That's what the family believed. That's why they kept collecting mirrors, even though they couldn't see themselves in them. They felt connected to them, drawn to them. She shook her head. And Mother said Cousin Frederick would spend hours in the gallery, staring into mirrors that showed only empty rooms, as if he were looking for something or someone just out of sight. What happened to Frederick? The records say he died without heirs. He wasted away, essentially, became increasingly reclusive, spending all his time in that house with his mirrors. When they found him, he was in the gallery, seated before the largest mirror, his hand pressed against the glass. A shadow crossed her face. The housekeeper who discovered him claimed, well, she claimed that for just a moment, she saw his reflection in the mirror, though his body was already cold, as if whatever part of him had been missing all his life had finally returned, but too late. And have you ever felt like something was missing when looking in a mirror? Tell us in the comments. We finished our tea in silence as I processed this information. The story was fantastic, impossible, and yet it aligned with everything I'd found. The curse was real. The Lambert men had lived without reflections because something essential had been taken from them, captured somehow in the mirrors their ancestor had created. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Do you know if Willem ever found a way to reverse it? I asked. His letter to Gerard mentioned he was working on a solution. Eleanor shook her head. If he did, the knowledge died with him. The curse continued unbroken through every generation. As I was leaving, Eleanor caught my arm. And to be careful, Mrs. Wilson. The mirrors remember, as the Lambert saying goes, and once they notice you... She trailed off, her expression troubled. Once they notice me... What? I pressed. They don't just take reflections, she whispered. They take interest. Back at the inn, I found a message from James Montgomery requesting that I come to the estate the following morning. Mr. Harbrook was eager to hear about my latest discoveries. I spent the evening organizing my notes and preparing my report, carefully excluding the more unsettling personal experiences I'd had. Whatever was happening with the mirrors, whether actual supernatural phenomena or simply my own exhausted mind playing tricks, I didn't want to appear unprofessional. As I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of movement in the bathroom mirror. Just for an instant, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, a tall figure in old-fashioned clothing, but when I spun around, the bathroom was empty. My hands trembling, I approached the mirror again. My reflection looked normal enough, pale and tired, but mimicking my movements correctly. I leaned closer, studying my own eyes for any sign of the independent movement I'd witnessed before. It's just exhaustion, I told my reflection firmly. Just an overactive imagination fueled by old legends and lack of sleep. My reflection stared back at me, its expression neutral. But as I turned away, I could have sworn I saw it smile just at the corner of the mouth, a slight upward turn that I hadn't made myself. I slept with the bathroom door firmly closed that night, though it did little to calm my nerves. My dreams were filled with endless corridors lined with mirrors, each showing a different scene, a different reality. And in each mirror, watching me pass, was the same figure. A man in 17th century clothing with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. Willem Lambert, I presumed, or some dream-conjured version of him. In the dream, he called to me as I passed, his voice distant and distorted as if coming from underwater. They remember, they always remember, and now they've seen you. I woke at dawn, the dream still vivid in my mind. As I rose to wash my face, I noticed something on the bathroom door that made my blood run cold. There, drawn in the condensation that had formed overnight, was a crude sketch of a mirror, and within it, a stick figure with long hair, like mine. Beside it, in the same handwriting from my notebook, were the words, "Look closer, see the truth." I stood frozen before the bathroom door, staring at the message drawn in condensation. It was impossible. The bathroom had no windows, no source of moisture sufficient to create that level of condensation overnight. And even if there had been, how could those precise words have formed? With shaking hands, I took a photo of the message before wiping it away. Evidence, though of what exactly I wasn't sure. Supernatural phenomena or an elaborate hoax. But who would go to such lengths? Harbrook, James, some unknown party with an interest in frightening me away from the Lambert investigation. I dressed quickly and packed my research materials. Whatever was happening, I needed to confront it directly. If Harbrook was behind this, I would demand answers at our meeting. If not, well, I wasn't sure what the alternative might be, but I couldn't continue in this state of uncertainty and fear. The morning was unnaturally still as I drove to the Harbrook estate, the countryside shrouded in a light mist that softened the edges of trees and buildings. The house emerged from the fog like a ship from a ghostly sea, its windows reflecting the grey morning light. James met me at the door, his expression unreadable as always. "Mr. Harbrook is waiting for you in the library," he said, leading me through the house. I noticed immediately that something had changed since my last visit. Many of the mirrors that had adorned the walls were now covered with dark cloth, like shrouds. "Renovations," James said, noticing my gaze. "Ah, the mirrors are being cleaned and restored." I didn't believe him for a second, but kept that thought to myself. The library was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace. Harbrook stood before it, his back to me as I entered. On a table nearby lay several old books, their leather bindings cracked with age. "Miss Wilson," he said, without turning, "I trust your research has been productive." "It has," I replied, setting my bag on a chair, "though I've had some unusual experiences along the way." "Oh." Now he turned, his expression mildly curious, though something in his eyes suggested he knew exactly what I meant. Messages appearing in my notebook, strange reflections in mirrors. A face in the tarnished mirror at the Lambert mausoleum. I watched him carefully as I spoke. "Almost as if the Lambert curse has taken an interest in me." Harbrook's expression remained neutral, but a subtle tension appeared in his shoulders. "How fascinating," he said. "And what have you concluded about the curse itself? Its origin, its mechanism?" I summarized my findings. Willem Lambert's experimentation with mirror-making techniques, the apparent ability of his mirrors to capture more than mere reflections, the generations of Lambert men born without reflections as a result. "But there's still something I don't understand," I finished. "Why are you so interested in this? What's your connection to the Lamberts?" Harbrook regarded me silently for a moment, then walked to a small side table where a wooden box rested. He opened it and withdrew an old document, which he handed to me. It was a family tree, meticulously drawn and dating back to the 1600s. My eyes widened as I traced the lines. A branch of the Lambert family had changed their name in the mid-1700s, becoming the Harbrooks. Cornelius Harbrook, my employer, was a direct descendant of Willem Lambert. "But you have a reflection," I said, glancing up at him. "I've seen it." "Yes," Harbrook agreed. "But the curse affected only those who carried the Lambert name. When Gerard's younger son Thomas changed his surname to Harbrook to secure an inheritance from his maternal grandfather, he and his descendants were spared." "Then why your interest in reversing it? The curse is gone." "The last Lambert died in 1953. A shadow crossed Harbrook's face. "Is it gone, though? You've experienced it yourself. The mirrors remember. They still hold pieces of my ancestors, trapped between worlds." He gestured to the books on the table. "I've spent decades researching Willem's techniques, trying to understand what he did and how it might be undone." "You want to free them," I realized. "The trapped reflections. or whatever they are. Souls, Harbrook said quietly, or fragments of souls, essences, if you prefer a less religious term. Whatever Willem's mirrors captured, it was something vital, something that shouldn't be separated from a living being. He turned toward the fireplace, his profile sharp against the flames. I believe Willem discovered a way to create true mirrors, ones that reflect reality exactly as it is, not reversed as conventional mirrors do. But to achieve this, the mirrors had to take something in exchange. A piece of the viewer became trapped, creating a space where the laws of reflection could be different. And you think you can reverse this process? After more than 300 years, I found Willem's journal, Harbrook said, indicating one of the books on the table. Speculorum Animarum, the text mentioned in his workshop inventory. It was hidden in a secret compartment in Willem Lambert's study. The methods are described there, including a theoretical process for reversal. I approached the table cautiously, drawn by scholarly curiosity despite my unease. The book was small but thick, bound in dark leather with no title on the spine or cover. When Harbrook nodded permission, I carefully opened it. The pages were filled with dense handwritten text in an archaic form of Dutch, interspersed with diagrams, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be alchemical symbols. Detailed illustrations depicted mirror-making processes, with annotations describing modifications to conventional techniques, unusual ingredients added to the silvering mixture, specific geometric arrangements of the workshop, rituals performed during critical stages of the process. One page showed a diagram of a human figure standing before a mirror. Lines of energy connected the figure to its reflection, with certain lines flowing from the person into the mirror but not returning, representing, I assumed, what the mirror took. He knew what he was doing, I murmured, tracing the diagram with my finger. No, this wasn't an accident. He deliberately created mirrors that would capture pieces of the viewer. Yes, Harbrook agreed, though I don't think he anticipated it would affect his own son or create a hereditary curse. The later entries show his growing horror as he realized what he'd done and his desperate attempts to reverse it. I turned to the final pages where the neat handwriting had become increasingly erratic, the diagrams more complex and strange. The last entry, dated just weeks before Willem's death in 1701, read, "I have found the method, but lack the strength to implement it. The mirrors have taken too much from me over the years of experimentation. They recognize me now. They watch, they wait. Perhaps Gerard will succeed where I have failed, though I fear the price is too high. To retrieve what the mirrors have taken requires offering something of equal value in exchange. A life for a life, a soul for a soul. I cannot ask this of my son. I will take the knowledge with me to my grave and pray that future generations find a less costly solution." I looked up at Harbrook, a chill running through me. A life for a life. He's talking about sacrifice. A poetic metaphor, perhaps, Harbrook said, though his voice lacked conviction. Or possibly a reference to some alchemical principle we no longer understand. And you've been trying to implement this method? Is that why the mirrors are covered? Has something gone wrong? Harbrook's expression hardened. I've been conducting experiments, yes. Carefully, methodically, but there have been unexpected developments. What kind of developments? Before he could answer, James entered the library, his usually impassive face showing signs of strain. "Sir, it's happening again. The gallery." Harbrook's face paled. "Excuse me, Miss Wilson. A minor issue with the renovation. Please continue examining the journal. I'll return shortly." They left hurriedly, closing the library door behind them. I stood there for a moment, debating what to do. The rational choice would be to stay put, continue my research, wait for Harbrook's return, But after everything I'd experienced, rationality seemed a poor guide. I quietly opened the door and peered into the hallway. It was empty. From somewhere deeper in the house came the sound of urgent voices. I slipped out of the library and followed the sound, moving cautiously through the grand house. The voices led me to a set of double doors on the second floor. They were ajar, allowing me to glimpse what appeared to be a long gallery with tall windows along one wall. The opposite wall was lined with mirrors, large, ornate affairs in gilt frames. Most were covered with dark cloth, but a few remained exposed. Through the gap in the doors, I could see Harbrook and James standing before one of the uncovered mirrors, their backs to me. They were speaking in low, tense voices. "It's getting stronger," James was saying. "The barrier is weakening." "We need more time," Harbrook replied. "The alignment won't be right for another 3 days." "We may not have 3 days. Look." They stepped aside, allowing me to see the mirror they had been blocking. My breath caught in my throat. The mirror didn't reflect the gallery at all. Instead, it showed what appeared to be the same room, but from a different time. The furnishings older, the light different, the colors muted as if in an old photograph. And in this reflected gallery stood a figure, a man in clothing from another century, his face gaunt and sorrowful. As I watched, he raised a hand and pressed it against the inside of the mirror, as if testing the boundary between his world and ours. I must have made some sound, because suddenly Harbrook and James turned toward the door. I stepped back, but not quickly enough. "Miss Wilson," Harbrook said sharply, "you shouldn't be here." He strode to the door and pulled it fully open, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "Since you're already witnessing this, you might as well understand what you're seeing." He gestured for me to enter the gallery. I stepped inside, my eyes drawn immediately to the strange mirror. The figure was still there, watching us with hollow eyes. Now that I could see him clearly, I recognized him from portraits I'd studied. Willem Lambert, Willem's son, the first to be born without a reflection. "He's been appearing with increasing frequency over the past month," Harbrook explained, his voice low. "At first just glimpses, a few seconds at a time. Now he remains for hours, watching, waiting." "Waiting for what?" I whispered. "For the barrier to thin enough for him to cross over," James said grimly, "or for someone to cross to his side." "The mirrors don't just capture reflections," Harbrook continued. "Would they create connections between worlds, our world and a kind of reflection of it? A place where everything is the same, but reversed. The people taken there live a kind of half-life, incomplete without their counterparts here." "And you've been trying to bring them back? All the Lambert men trapped over the centuries?" Harbrook nodded. Willem's journal suggests it's possible, during certain alignments when the barrier between worlds naturally thins. But it requires a guide, someone who exists fully in our world, but has been noticed by the mirrors. A cold realization dawned on me. Someone like me. That's why you hired me, isn't it? Not for historical research, but because you needed someone to make a connection with the mirrors. "You have a natural sensitivity," Harbrook admitted. "I recognized it when we first met. The mirrors responded to you immediately." "You've been manipulating me," I said, anger rising. "Setting me up as some kind of sacrifice." "Not a sacrifice," he insisted. "A guide, a bridge. You would be in no danger." "A life for a life," I quoted from Willem's journal. "A soul for a soul. That doesn't sound harmless to me." Before Harbrook could respond, a sound came from the mirror, a tapping, insistent and rhythmic. Willem Lambert was rapping his knuckles against the inside of the glass, his expression suddenly animated. "He's trying to communicate," James said, moving closer to the mirror. The tapping continued, forming a pattern I gradually recognized as Morse code, ... SOS, the universal distress signal. He's warning us," I said. Whatever you're planning, he's trying to stop it. Nonsense, Harbrook snapped. He wants to be freed. They all do. But Gerard was shaking his head vehemently, his tapping growing more urgent. He mouthed words we couldn't hear, his expression desperate. And then, with a sound like cracking ice, a thin fissure appeared in the mirror's surface. It spread slowly from the center outward, like a spider web growing in fast motion. "It's happening," James said, his voice hushed with awe and fear. "The barrier is breaking." "But the alignment isn't right," Harbrook protested. "The conditions aren't perfect." "It doesn't matter," I realized, backing away from the mirror. "They're forcing it, breaking through on their own." As if confirming my words, more mirrors around the gallery began to crack, tiny fissures appearing in their surfaces. Behind each one, dim figures could be seen moving, pressing against the glass. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Harbrook's arm. "Now." But he shook me off, moving closer to the first mirror where Gerard stood. "My ancestors," he whispered, "and coming home at last." The largest crack in the mirror suddenly widened, and a sound emerged, a low, mournful wail that seemed to contain centuries of loneliness and despair. The temperature in the gallery plummeted, my breath clouding in the suddenly frigid air. "This isn't a homecoming," I said, my voice shaking. "It's an escape, a prison break." Gerard was shaking his head more frantically now, his expression no longer sorrowful but terrified. He wasn't trying to come through, he was trying to warn us about what was coming with him. In the reflection behind Gerard, I could see other figures now, their forms less human, more like shadows with substance. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, flowing rather than walking, and they were approaching the cracked mirror with clear purpose. "Whatever Willem captured in those mirrors," I said, backing toward the door, "it wasn't just pieces of the Lambert men. Something else came through. Something that's been waiting all this time." James seemed to finally understand the danger. He grabbed Harbrook's shoulder. "Sir, we need to go. This isn't what we planned." But Harbrook shrugged him off, entranced by the cracking mirrors and the figures emerging from within them. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran from the gallery, down the stairs, through the labyrinthine corridors of the house. Behind me, I heard a sound like 1,000 mirrors shattering at once, followed by a rush of cold air that seemed to chase me through the house. I burst through the front door into the misty morning, not stopping until I reached my car. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back at the house. Every window blazed with an unnatural light, and through them, I could see moving shadows, flowing like liquid from room to room. The Harbrook estate, the former Lambert home, was reclaiming its own. I drove away and didn't look back, not stopping until I'd reached the next town over. There, in a small cafe, I sat with trembling hands and tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Had Harbrook survived? Had James? I didn't know. And some deep instinct told me it was safer not to return to find out. Whatever had been trapped in those mirrors for centuries was free now, and the estate had become its domain. 3 days later, back in London, I read the local news online. Historic Harbrook estate, destroyed in fire, owner missing. The article mentioned that the cause was under investigation, but witnesses reported seeing the windows blazing with light before the flames became visible, and described the fire as burning with unusual intensity, reducing the entire structure to ash in hours. I closed my laptop and glanced at my reflection in the darkened screen. For just a moment, I thought I saw something move behind me, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. But when I turned, my apartment was empty. That night, I covered every mirror in my home with cloth. I tell myself it's just a precaution, that I'm being overly cautious. But sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I hear tapping from beneath the coverings, a soft, rhythmic sound like fingernails on glass. And occasionally, when passing a window or any reflective surface, I catch a glimpse of movement that doesn't match my own. a shadow that lingers too long, a smile I never made. The Lambert curse may have ended with the destruction of the estate and its mirrors, but I can't shake the feeling that something noticed me during my investigation. Something that remembers me still. After all, as the Lambert saying goes, the mirrors remember. They always remember. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, subscribe to this channel. The next story might be closer than you imagine.